It's easy to think of Lee Remick purely in terms of her luminous on-screen presence. The wide, expressive eyes, the delicate but resolute voice, and a certain quiet strength that made her mesmerizing in films like Anatomy of a Murder, Days of Wine and Roses, and The Omen. Yet the real woman behind that gentle facade was more than an iconic actress. She was also a private soul who valued emotional security as much as professional achievement. After all, she navigated the pitfalls of Hollywood from a very young age, and as she matured, she retreated into a world where she could control the script of her own daily life. That refuge took shape in the form of a hidden hillside residence, one that, for many years, fans never even realized existed. Unlike some of her peers, Remick wasn't drawn to enormous mansions or lavish, showy estates. She'd often say, in her soft-spoken but firm manner, "Elegance is about quiet confidence, not grand displays." This perspective shaped not only how she carried herself on screen, but how she curated her personal environments. From the beginning, when she first set foot in Los Angeles in the mid-1950s, she disliked the sprawling palaces of the famous. She was young then, barely in her 20s, yet already she knew that her career might balloon into something bigger than she ever expected. To cope with that possibility, she needed a space tucked away from prying eyes, a place she could control entirely. So, after renting a small, unremarkable apartment near Sunset Boulevard for a couple of years, she gravitated toward a more secluded property in the hills, no more than a short drive from the studios, yet a world away in ambiance. Hollywood Hills home, primary residence. The real estate agent who first led her to the hillside property told her it had once been owned by a silent film star, an actress who specialized in comedic roles, but whose personal life was anything but amusing. Rumors abounded that the previous owner had installed secret compartments in the floorboards to hide her love letters written by a high society beau who disapproved of her career. The agent laughed it off as Hollywood gossip, but Remick, with her inquisitive spirit, didn't dismiss the notion so easily. In fact, she found it oddly reassuring that the house had historically been a retreat for someone else longing for privacy. With that intangible sense of shared secrecy, she was sold. Soon she was signing papers, shifting her life from that Sunset Boulevard apartment to a sturdy white stucco villa perched on a ridge. Initially, it was just a shell of Spanish colonial revival architecture, with a red tile roof and weathered wooden beams. But through the front door, an arched corridor led into a living room with giant windows that overlooked a steep canyon. One of the first changes Remick insisted upon was removing the heavy drapery left behind by the previous tenant. She wanted the view to flow freely inside. "If I'm going to watch the city," she reportedly told a friend, "I want the city to know it can watch me too, just on my terms." That was so typically Lee Remick, poised, unafraid, and quietly defiant. From that vantage point, she could see the sprawl of Los Angeles sparkling at night like a galaxy of possibilities. But safely at a distance, she joked that it reminded her of her dynamic with the film industry, intimately connected, yet carefully separated by her own boundaries. Everyone who visited her in those early days commented on the sense of calm that pervaded the place. The polished hardwood floors were bare, except for a few tastefully chosen rugs. Remick believed in letting rooms breathe. Along the walls, simple sconces cast a warm glow in the evenings, offsetting the sometimes stark mid-century modern furniture she'd had brought in from New York. The style was an elegant hybrid, bridging the older Spanish architecture with the mid-century pieces she'd fallen in love with during her time on the East Coast. She loved bold statements, a large abstract painting above the fireplace, for instance, but everything was curated to exude softness, never brashness. Interestingly, the property came with a small guest house tucked at the far edge of the lot, nearly hidden by a thicket of juniper and bougainvillea. At first, she had no intention of using it for anything other than storage, but after hosting a close friend, a Broadway producer who needed a quiet place to write, she realized it was the perfect creative hideaway. Over the years, that guest house became the site of many brainstorming sessions. Scripts were poured over, lines were rehearsed, and characters were born in that tiny space. Some nights, famous directors or fellow actors popped by to chat about new projects, though these gatherings were intimate, rarely more than a handful of people. Remick valued small circles, prizing genuine connection over industry networking. The thick vines and tall hedges served as a natural fortress, ensuring that no paparazzi camera could catch a glimpse of who was visiting or what they were working on. Even neighbors rarely guessed that so many quiet Hollywood deals were being sketched out behind those vine-draped walls. Of course, her quest for privacy wasn't simply a matter of shutting out the world. Remick was always introspective, even as a child in Quincy, Massachusetts, where she was born in 1935. She grew up learning ballet, which gave her a sense of discipline and grace she carried into her adulthood. This discipline, ironically, also fueled a certain self-consciousness. She was careful about how she presented herself to others, not wanting to appear pretentious or aloof. That same caution extended to her personal living space. She didn't want a fortress-like compound that screamed untouchable. Instead, she wanted a home that felt like a sanctuary without alienating her from the vibrant energy of Los Angeles. And indeed, the layout of the house allowed for that delicate balance. The city was ever present in the distance, yet behind the gates, her world was self-contained and reassuring. Remick's professional life in the 1960s soared. She received an Oscar nomination for Days of Wine and Roses in 1962, and by the decade's end, she was one of the most respected actresses of her generation. Yet with that acclaim came the tabloid press, eager to photograph her at unguarded moments or speculate about her relationships. The strategy she adopted was subtle. Rather than engage in public spats with the media, she quietly upgraded her property's perimeter. A neatly trimmed set of hedges was replaced with a thicker row of cypress trees. The wrought iron gates at the driveway were reinforced, but designed to look more decorative than imposing. A new koi pond near the entrance served as a kind of meditative feature, a small fountain softly trickling so that any approaching footsteps were masked by the gentle sound of water. Even the doorbell was changed to a soft chime, a far cry from the buzzer that had startled her during an unexpected visit from a persistent reporter. Around this time, Remick also decided to cultivate a garden along the back slope of the property. Perhaps longing for a bit of her New England roots, she introduced roses, fragrant varieties that thrived under the California sun, and hydrangeas that struggled a bit in the heat but reminded her of home. A local gardener who helped her described her style as patient but precise. She wanted each bed measured just so, each path to curve gently and lead to a nook or seat that offered a distinct vantage point. Over several years, the back garden was transformed into a meandering wonderland of color and scent, culminating in a small hidden bench under a willow. That bench soon became Lee's favorite reading spot. Friends often found her there on late afternoons, script or novel in hand, a straw hat shielding her from the bright light, as a gentle breeze carried the perfume of roses. She called it her theater seat for nature, a place to observe the interplay of sunlight and shadow, almost like an audience member at a quiet, private performance. Inside the main house, her bedroom was as thoughtfully arranged as the garden. A large bay window opened to a panoramic sweep of city lights at night, and she'd installed delicate gauzy curtains that seemed to float when the wind billowed through. At the foot of the bed, she kept a vintage trunk she'd inherited from her grandmother, a piece that reminded her of her family's simpler days in Massachusetts. When friends pressed her about the trunk's contents, she'd laugh, "That's where all my secrets lie." Many guessed it held diaries or letters from old romances, but few ever mustered the courage to open it. One evening, a longtime confidant revealed that inside were actually carefully folded scrapbooks, pressed flowers from her childhood, notes from her mother, along with ticket stubs from her earliest performances. She preserved them there so she could access them when the reality of Hollywood felt too unreal. Manhattan Penthouse, while her Hollywood Hills hideaway was the crown jewel of her real estate life. It wasn't her only property. In the mid-1970s, her career took her to New York City for several stage productions. She craved the electric vibe of live theater, far from the glare of Hollywood cameras. At first, she rented a series of temporary apartments near Broadway, but eventually, she found an Art Deco penthouse on the Upper East Side. By the time she decided to buy it, her taste had evolved. This penthouse was a striking contrast to her Los Angeles refuge. Sleek black and white tiles lined the entryway, and floor-to-ceiling windows let in the morning sun, making the living room shimmer with that distinct Manhattan brightness. The decor was minimalist, leaning on metallic accents and mirrors that multiplied the light. It felt like a modern, urbane counterpart to the airy, intimate feeling of her hillside home in California. The Manhattan Penthouse became her war room of sorts, a place to strategize her stage career, rehearse lines, and entertain directors from the theater world. She'd pace the living room, script in hand, practicing monologues that demanded a different skill set from the subtlety required in film. Guests who stayed late often found themselves drawn to the small bar in the corner, where Remick kept a few of her favorite whiskeys. She'd developed a refined palate for scotch while filming Days of Wine and Roses, ironically enough. Every so often, a castmate or director would catch her reflection in one of the strategically placed mirrors and realize how carefully she'd orchestrated even this private space. She was all about angles. Whether in acting or in her interior design, she knew how to craft illusions and reveal truths only when she intended. The penthouse's palette, cool grays, crisp whites, silver finishes, reflected her controlled approach to her New York chapter. This was the domain where she faced creative challenges head-on, willingly stepping into more demanding stage roles that tested her emotional stamina. The differences between her Hollywood home and her Manhattan penthouse were stark. If the Los Angeles property embodied warmth, a sense of escape, and the comfort of hidden corners, the New York penthouse was polished, unflinching, and dynamic, much like the city itself. Even the acoustics told two different stories. In Los Angeles, the high ceilings and minimal furnishings often lent the living room a faint echo, like a whisper. In Manhattan, every sharp heel on the tile rang out clearly, underscoring the pace at which life moved there. Yet both spaces mirrored fundamental aspects of Lee Remick's personality. She was at once the gentle presence who craved solitude and the determined professional who thrived under pressure. Hudson Valley Cottage. For a short period in the late 1970s, she also maintained a small cottage upstate near the Hudson Valley. It was rumored that she chose this location because she wanted a weekend escape from the frenetic pulse of Manhattan. If the Hollywood Hills was her sanctuary from prying eyes, and the penthouse her forward operating base for the theater, the Hudson Cottage was her genuine retreat into nature. In these woodlands, she'd arrive on Friday evenings, turn off her phone, and live in quiet seclusion until Monday morning. An old friend who spent time there recalled that Remick insisted on keeping the decor as rustic as possible: wooden floors that creaked, a stone fireplace with a persistent draft, and a kitchen that still relied on a vintage stove that sputtered. She didn't even bother hooking up cable television. This was the place where she returned to a simpler version of herself. Those who visited the cottage remember the large wooden deck overlooking a dense grove of maples. On early autumn mornings, the entire view exploded in reds, oranges, and yellows. Remick would brew tea in an enamel kettle, then sip it slowly on the deck, taking in the crisp air. If the Hollywood home was about curated calm and the Manhattan penthouse was about disciplined ambition, this cottage was about pure authenticity. This is where I remind myself that there's more to life than the next role, she'd say, according to one of her close friends. On the walls she hung no film posters, no awards, nothing that reminded her of her public identity. Instead, there were paintings of nature, quiet, pastoral scenes. It was as if she needed this place to reconnect with the girl who had grown up by the water in Massachusetts, dancing her first steps, daydreaming about a future she could never fully anticipate. And yet it was her hidden Hollywood home that remained the most iconic of all her residences. Even in the later years, when her roles became more selective and her approach to work more discerning, that house in the hills never lost its meaning for her. There are tales of a hidden vault she had built into one of the interior walls. Though the architecture was so seamless, it's difficult to verify if it was actually there. A rumor circulated among her acquaintances that she stored not valuables, but personal letters and diaries in that vault. Supposedly, she once told a visiting writer who admired the hallway's decorative paneling, if these walls could talk, they wouldn't dare. People took that as a cryptic nod to her secret, though she never confirmed or denied it outright. Beyond the rumors, there's a lesser-known anecdote that underscores Remick's love for that hillside house. During the filming of The Omen in 1975, she was often inundated with press. While she found the project exhilarating, the sudden spike in interest from fans of horror films put her privacy at risk. One night, a small group of overzealous admirers managed to follow her car into the winding roads near her home. Instead of making a scene or calling security, she calmly parked in front of her gate, got out, and greeted them. She signed a few autographs, gently explaining that she appreciated their support, but hoped they'd understand her need for solitude. They apologized, and she graciously pointed them back to the main road, ensuring they wouldn't get lost in the dark. When a friend asked her why she didn't just call the police, Remick said, "I can't let fear define how I live. If I lose my calm here, then this place isn't a refuge anymore." Inside the house, her favorite place, aside from the bedroom, was a small alcove off the main living room, a recessed nook with built-in shelves and a plush divan. Light from the garden filtered through a narrow window, illuminating the spines of books collected over her lifetime. She had everything from Shakespearean plays to contemporary novels, as well as volumes on photography and dance. That alcove was like a personal study, though she rarely used it for any intense creative work. Instead, she'd curl up there with a cup of tea, sometimes simply daydreaming while gazing at the clouds drifting by. Visitors often remarked on the peaceful vibe in that corner, feeling as if they'd momentarily stepped out of time. It was widely known among her close circle that if you wanted to have a heart-to-heart with Lee, you might end up in that alcove, sharing confidences and quiet laughter. Over the years, the house bore witness to small but important changes in her life. When she married producer Bill Colleran in 1957 and later divorced, the decor shifted. Fewer pieces of shared memorabilia, fewer photographs on the mantel. When she married British producer William Rory Kip Gowans in 1970, the house gained new flourishes: English tea sets, decorative plates depicting the moors, and thick curtains in certain rooms for the cooler months. Yet the fundamental character of the property remained intact. It was always that quiet, white stucco oasis tucked behind discreet greenery, with a vantage point onto a city brimming with stories. Somehow, her home felt like an extension of her soul, unassuming, refined, and full of hidden depth. Despite her best efforts to keep it hidden, word of this house did slip out among Hollywood insiders. It became something of a legend. If you were invited, it meant Lee Remick trusted you, welcomed you into her sacred space. Many an actor or director who visited for script read-throughs came away changed, as if the hush of that property and the kindness of its hostess cast a spell. One television producer once remarked, "I expected a dramatic star to have a dramatic home, full of velvet and chandeliers. Instead, I found a luminous star in a place of quiet, luminous beauty. It was the most authentic experience I've ever had in this industry." The staff she employed over the years was minimal. Usually one housekeeper who came a few days a week and a gardener who tended the grounds. She insisted that no one wear uniforms, preferring that they feel at home as well. In the morning, she'd make her own coffee, an old New England habit she clung to. If the gardener arrived while she was taking in the sunrise, she'd wave a friendly greeting and sometimes offer a simple breakfast. A housekeeper who worked there for 3 years recalled how Remick insisted on drying the dishes herself even when she was exhausted from a night shoot. "It helps me wind down," she explained. "It's normal, and normal is what I need." For her, that was the ultimate luxury: privacy and normalcy in a world where both can be hard to find. When discussing her home life, Remick rarely divulged details. She played coy in interviews, deflecting questions about her personal space with a gentle smile. But every now and then, a carefully chosen anecdote would slip through. She once described a particular evening at home when she invited a close friend who'd been through a tough divorce. They spent hours by the fireplace, never turning on the television, simply talking and occasionally lapsing into comfortable silence. It was a moment of human connection, she said, that defined her sense of home. Not lavish parties, not red carpets, but simple authenticity. That was the heart of her approach to designing and living in her hidden Hollywood refuge. In the mid-1980s, after her children were grown, some assumed she might downsize or shift permanently to New York. But she kept the house, maintaining it as a balance to her urban life. Her daughter Kate would later recount how the family would gather there for holidays, grateful for the sense of stability it offered amidst ever-shifting film schedules. Christmas in that home was understated. A modest tree in the corner of the living room, lights draped along the banister, and the fireplace lit, filling the space with the comforting scent of burning wood. Gifts were exchanged in the morning, followed by a quiet brunch by the garden, provided the weather allowed. It wasn't a grand Hollywood production, but that was never her style. She valued closeness, memory, and emotional resonance over spectacle. Remick's health began to decline in the late 1980s. Diagnosed with kidney and liver cancer, she spent long periods resting, sometimes in New York, sometimes in Los Angeles. Yet even when she felt her worst, returning to her hillside home seemed to rejuvenate her, if only in spirit. Visitors recalled how the shifting golden light through those large windows acted like a balm for her pain. She couldn't be as active in the garden, but she'd sit at her bedroom window, watching the birds peck at the feeder. In those final years, the house became less of a social hub and more of a deeply personal cocoon, a place to face her own fragility and find strength in the environment she'd so meticulously nurtured. She passed away in 1991, leaving behind not just an extraordinary film legacy, but also this discreet, profoundly personal footprint on the Hollywood Hills. Since her death, the property's ownership has changed hands, though the architectural essence remains. The rumor about the secret vault persists. Some say a subsequent owner discovered it. Others claim it's just a bit of Hollywood lore. What's certain is that the house still commands a mysterious aura. Neighbors tell stories of hearing faint music at odd hours, possibly from some old record player behind those walls. A handful of real estate enthusiasts wonder if there are documents hidden away that detail her design choices or diaries describing her final days in that cherished space. The home's current owners reportedly keep it mostly under wraps, refusing requests for tours. It seems fitting that the property retains its elusive character, a quiet testament to the woman who once lived there, who gave so much of herself in her roles, yet guarded her true self with equal measure. Reflecting on her real estate journey, her hillside refuge, her Manhattan penthouse, and that rustic cottage upstate, we see a portrait of Lee Remick far richer than what we glean from her filmography alone. She was an actress who balanced vulnerability and strength in her performances, and she carried that same delicate equilibrium into her personal life. The Los Angeles home was an embrace of open space and understated warmth, a place to dream and be at peace. The Manhattan penthouse was a stage of ambition and polished sophistication, where she shaped her career moves and engaged with the theater world's demands. And the humble cottage near the Hudson was her way of remembering what it felt like to be free from the rush of expectations, an anchor to a simpler existence that fame could never fully replicate. Aotearoa. The beauty in these homes wasn't merely about architecture or decor. Each property symbolized a chapter in her life and a facet of her soul, the dancer who craved serenity, the actress who thrived on challenging roles, and the private individual who needed an escape from the ceaseless buzz of celebrity. If her Hollywood house had a voice, it might speak of the many nights she spent pondering her future, the glow of a single lamp illuminating her script or an old photograph. It might whisper of the hush that fell over the living room when she retreated to that alcove, her mind drifting between lines of poetry and the hush of real life. And it might recall the laughter of intimate gatherings, gentle conversations that shaped her artistic choices, unbothered by the glare of publicity. And that's all for today's video. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up, let us know your thoughts in the comments section, and subscribe so you won't miss out on future uploads. See you next time.